Fred Cheney to address us next. Thanks, Fred.
Can I make a very quick couple of comments, which I hope might give some assistance to you, and can also say how much I admire the stamina of the Rangelands people. In fact, watching you reminded me of how I felt like Bill Clinton over these few days when he got all the Nobel Prize winners into the White House. He said to them, "This is the most talent there's been in the White House since Thomas Jefferson dined alone." And I just want to say this is the most talent I've seen in Alice Springs since Bruce and Claire and I dined alone on Tuesday. Can I say something about specialisation? I came to this conference aware that I was the most ignorant person in the room in many areas of your knowledge. And I want to refer very quickly to something that Dr. Ian Watson said, or the presentation he gave in the second session, because I think it's relevant to the ideas that Bruce has put before you. Ian gave us a splendid exposition, and those of you who didn't see it, there's a summary on page 16 of the conference booklet. But he talked about this extraordinary multidisciplinary research effort that had gone into preparing for activity in the Gulf region. And the most telling thing that I thought he said was when, just at the end, he said, mind you, we didn't include this area of research and this area of research and this area of research. And of course, what that reminded me of is the incompleteness of the work of each of us. And as someone who's been a politician, getting information from dedicated bureaucrats and sometimes from scientists, it's so hard to get the whole picture from a particular area of specialty. And if you want to know a reason for engaging with the community and acting in broad ways, it is because otherwise what you say is likely to be bullshit. Partial bullshit. And let me give you a working example. In a campaign for a state election seat in Western Australia many years ago, I was in Port Hedland. And I was talking to an old Aboriginal man, and he said how bad things were in the old nomad stations. He described carnage, despair, and a disgrace. I said to him, it can't possibly be that bad. I said, there are public servants going out to these places every day and checking. He said, yep, and they're so busy checking they never look up from their clipboards. The truth is, you have to remain sensitive to the environment, the human environment which you're working, and if it doesn't make sense to the locals, then it probably doesn't make sense. And so I really want to say that whatever you do in terms of radicalising the rangelands, one of the things we have to do is to build on the fantastic things we've heard about here over the last 3 days, about working together across disciplines, across communities, and so on. The other thing I want to say was about radicalisation. I'm really in favour of speaking softly and carrying a big stick. What changed the attitude of the mining industry to working with Aboriginal Australians? Was it that the blessed Leon Davis, and I call him blessed not ironically because he's the miner, the head of Rio Tinto, who led the new direction in 1995, did he fall off his horse on the road to somewhere? No, he didn't. He suddenly found that they were operating in a world of native title where the rules of the game had changed. As an American professor said at a seminar we ran in the early days of native title, when he was asked by one of our shiny-eyed staff, "Oh, Professor, it's obvious that miners love working with native peoples in America," he said, "Well, in my experience, a mining company is at its most reasonable after you hit it over the head with a piece of 4B2. Mabo was a piece of 4B2, and it caused a spiritual revolution. And I am deeply grateful to Leon Davis and to the good miners who led that change, but they led it because the rules of the game had changed. There was a big stick. And I think you've got to find those sticks. I referred in my address to royalties for regions. There are a lot of people who represent remote Australia. It's about time they were called to account and reminded that they have power. They should be using that power as the Nationals use in Western Australia to say the condition of our supporting a government is. that there is a fair deal for the rangelands. You don't have much economic clout. I got in deep shit with some of my friends, pastoralists in Western Australia, because they said I had lied about the rangelands in Western Australia. I had lied by saying that only 5% of farm product in Western Australia came from the rangelands. I had to get out the statistics. It was true, thank you. So we have here a combination of moral arguments of pride, of arguments of patriotism, practical arguments, strategic and otherwise. But what I would say to you is that wherever you've got leverage, use it. Work out what your leverage is, where that leverage is to be found, and use it. But also work with humility with the people around you. Let me finish by quoting Paul Hasluck. Hasluck, in my view, is a figure who deserves to be revered. He was for a long time responsible for this territory as Minister for Territories. He was one of the first people in Australia, as a journalist, as a historian, as a politician, to treat Aboriginal people as human beings. He recognised their full and equal humanity and wanted them to be fully admitted into Australian citizenship. Whatever his mistakes, and of course he made them, that's what Hasluck stood for. And I often go back to a passage in a book he wrote about his Aboriginal experience, and he said this: the doctrine of assimilation, the policy, was no more than a guide. What should guide the people implementing this policy is to do something, observe what has happened, and the test is what is happening to people. The test is what is happening to people. Now, that's my test, ladies and gentlemen. It's my test for the rangelands, it's my test for Perth, it's my test for wherever I am. That is what is really important. And that's why it doesn't matter how good your research and your specialty is. In the end, its relevance to humanity is actually what counts, and what will, in the end, I think, carry the day. Good luck to the rangelands. You deserve a better deal.
I think we are very lucky to have such passionate advocates for the rangelands and people who can help to show us the sort of passion that you need in order to bring about change. Now have Steve Rogers to give us his views. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. I actually started this job in January, not June last year, so I think I'm about 9 weeks in. What I want to talk to you today is with regards to innovation in the rangelands, and I don't like rangelands, I'm going to call it the outback, is what lessons we can potentially learn from the resource sector. We've heard it a number of times over the last few days, and it's been reiterated by Bruce in his talk. We really need an organisation, a single body, that is not only going to develop a joint vision for what are the key challenges and what are the potential solutions that require technological and innovation within the rangelands, but I would also go further and argue we need a single entity that's actually going to broker that research, and it's not the government. So within the resource industry, within the mining industry, in the 1950s, 3 guys from the Australian 3 mining companies sat around a table in Melbourne, and they formed the Australian Minerals Industry Research Association. This was formed as a recognition that there were a range of technological challenges, a range of issues requiring innovation that cut across the whole of the mining industry, whether you're a gold miner in Kalgoorlie, whether you're a uranium miner in South Australia, or whether you're an alumina smelter in Gove in Arnhem Land. And the key thing was that they had to take leadership. Government wasn't going to take leadership here. Government wasn't going to put resources into this. So from that small group of guys sitting around a smoky room in Melbourne in the 1950s, grew to Amira today, which is a $42 million a year international research broker that brings industry, researchers together and puts together programs that address real issues. Now, I would argue that in the outback, do we not have similar challenges? Fundamental issues that cut across all communities and business sectors: water, infrastructure, telecommunications, power, environmental management, economic opportunities, jobs. These are the same challenges whether you're a remote Aboriginal community or a major pastoral operation. I'd argue that we can't rely on governments. I'll quote Bruce, policy alone has failed. It is down to those organisations and businesses operating in the rangelands to take the initiative and leadership here. Bruce mentioned progressive policy. I'd also argue we need some transformational thinking. But of course I hear you saying, oh yes, but you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar global industry, the mining industry. They've got plenty of cash. They can throw money at these things. We don't have the resources. I'd suggest if you look around this room and you look through the list of delegates at this meeting, how many different organisations are represented here? Probably more importantly, how many organisations that are operating within the rangelands are not represented here? I'd strongly support Bruce's proposal for the Outback Trust Fund, but would go one stage further and suggest that we would ring fence a proportion of that fund for innovation, research and the development of outback rangelands knowledge. A couple of other points on this particular issue. On Tuesday, I certainly heard that the outback rangelands is about 5% of the Australian population. Doesn't sound like many, but that's 1.2 million people. And if we were to look at a population of 1.2 million people, that would place us 156th in terms of population out of the 247 sovereign nations and territories. That's a lot of capacity and capability that we can draw on in the outback. I'd argue that we as a broader collective do not take the leadership and develop the proactive strategies to address the issues, then no one else will, and governments certainly aren't. Second point I'd want to make is to encourage everybody here to look and take a global innovation market view in terms of what we do. We've heard fantastic work, reports of fantastic work being done in the last few days, but we often hear that the remote outback market is too small to justify both public and private sector investment in innovation and new technologies. But at the same time, we know that there are many similar challenges globally in remote environments. I don't need to tell you that, you know that. We need to collectively identify and promote our unique capabilities and products and really define where we are internationally competitive. Now, I'll give you another example from the mining sector, and I'll talk to you about the Australian Mining and Technical Services sector. The acronym is METS. This is the sector that provides services to the mining industry, everything from engineering design, project management, water and environmental management. Now, this sector's grown rapidly in the last 10 to 15 years, mainly driven by internationalisation and exports. It's now a $90 billion a year industry, with nearly $30 billion of that is our exports. It's 270 companies. 40% of these companies employ less than 10 people. They're small to medium enterprises. And the majority of these companies are exporting knowledge, not products, not widgets, they're not manufacturers. We've heard Bruce talk about the knowledge generation and outback and rangeland knowledge. There's a real opportunity for us here in the Australian outback to internationalise and export our unique knowledge. We must challenge ourselves when we work on projects to address outback issues, to critically assess where opportunities lie to transfer that knowledge, potentially on a commercial basis internationally. How many SMEs are in this room? How many SMEs operate within the rangelands? We've seen a few examples this week of small to medium enterprises and commercial businesses that are operating. We need to think as a group and collectively about spin-off companies, entities that are able to commercialise our knowledge. And if the parent organisation, for whatever reason, is unable to do that, then we create a new commercial entity which will allow the export of our knowledge. In fact, we've done that in CAT. I won't go into any details. Yes, this is not easy. Yes, it might mean thinking about how we go about our business in both the public and the private sector in a different way. It's risky. Many entities will fail, and there is significant international competition. But it's certainly my opinion that there is significant opportunity, and this is how we will build a sustainable outback knowledge economy, and dare I say it, jobs and economic opportunities independent of government or reliance on government funding. And the third very quick point I want to make is about the transdisciplinary approach. And I will also relate to Ian Watson's paper on Tuesday, but on a slightly different level. Ian talked about transdisciplinary research and approach to innovation. Now, this is something that's very close to my heart, but I'd like to challenge all the scientists in this room now and the researchers in the room, and I was one of you once, maybe I still am. How often do we really look outside of our particular discipline area? How often do we not just look outside our discipline area, but do we look outside our cultural, professional, sectoral and industry boundaries? How many soil scientists read mineral processing journals and vice versa? How many plant biologists read mining exploration and geochemistry journals? I'll give you an example of where this really works in an outback setting. When I was the CEO for the CRC for Landscape, Environments and Mineral Exploration, industry had presented us with a challenge. How can we develop a cheaper way to discover mineral deposits buried under hundreds and hundreds of metres of regolith? Now, regolith is everything from fresh air to fresh rock. So we sat around one day and one bright botanist noted that in the arid outback environments, native trees put down deep taproots. River red gums go down 40 or 50 metres. In fact, spinifex puts a taproot down about 40 metres. A geochemist noted that sometimes he saw mineral signatures in groundwater bores. An analytical chemist noted that modern analytical techniques can detect part per trillion concentrations of minerals in plant tissues. With the additional input from soil scientists and exploration geologists, the outcome was a technique known as phytoexploration, where you take a leaf off a tree and you analyse it for a range of trace elements, gold, uranium, whatever. And that technique was applied to the discovery of a major uranium deposit in Australia. And back to my earlier point, that technique has now been adopted by exploration industry in Africa and South America. Knowledge generated in Australia and outback has been exported globally. Thank you.
A number of challenges there, which I think should set people thinking. And now I call on Claire Martin to have, I hope it's not, they haven't said it all for you.
Just about.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Marg. Look, you've heard a lot, and I think we want to have time for questions and interrogations, if that's what we're going to do. So I just wanted to make 2 points about what I have observed over the last few days and a kind of long iterative relationship with both Fred and Bruce about how they feel about governments and the outback. And I always end up cringing when they talk about that and feel terribly guilty. But I just want to kind of pick up a couple of things that were said about, Bruce particularly said about, in the past, Australians who in majority, as we know, live on the coast, how they actually had an interaction with the outback. There was a connection. And that we've seen that, as Bruce spelled out, over time disconnect. So while there might be over 1 million people living in what we call the outback, the majority, the other 22 million, live along the coast. And I put that together, that thought together with Bruce's, the kind of failure of governments to deal with good policy and investment in outback Australia. But I put that together with what I have heard over the last few days and Bruce's idea that we need to have disruption. I think disruption's great. I think it's fantastic. I'm a woman of the 70s. We loved it. But I put it together with what I've heard and what you're doing and the amazing stories and successes I think that we are having across rangelands, across the outback. And I can't quite get the two narratives together in my head. So you've got this sense of failure on one level, but you're also having these green shoots of success in many different ways across our rangelands, our outback. And we've got to work out, and I think it is this group and others to join it, how we bring those two together. I mean, Bruce has got the idea of an outback commission. I think it's a great idea. But we've got to work out what is happening in this amazing outback and the initiatives, the innovations, how we can get that message through to the rest of Australia. And I think that is a really big challenge because as a politician for many years, what really moves you the most is people and their voices. And what we need is to see those voices, knowledge harnessed to Outback Australia from our coastal regions. Now, I don't know how you do that. You're going to need money to do it. But I think that's where the power is going to come from. When Australians the majority of them don't simply disconnect from what's happening in our outback. And that takes me to another point, which is, how do we refer to this part of Australia? Now, Bruce had some discussion about it, but I noted that when he was talking, he talked remote, inland, desert, bush, and rangelands. So we have this variety of words, and I didn't add dead heart there, which I really hate, a variety of words to describe this part of Australia. And I really wonder about the use of remote. I mean, I'm often told in Darwin that I live remotely, and I say, oh, come on, I've got 500 million neighbours. I'm not remote. The rest of Australia might be, and that would include Canberra. And I just think we have to look at the words we're using to describe this part of Australia. We could say the bush. I don't know. I think Barry and the modern outback is a really good one. I think outback is a word that does connect with coastal Australians. But I think we have to stop using words that cause alienation or cause a disconnect with the rest of Australia. And I put remote up there as the first one. I don't know whether you agree. Who agrees? Am I just talking to myself? Yeah. I mean, I just think remote, I hate it when people tell me I live remotely because I don't feel I live remotely. They might be a long way from me, but it doesn't make me remote and isolated. And I think we need to recast that for this vast area of Central Australia, central meaning not the coastal areas. And what I think is that we need a new narrative about it. You've all heard the narratives, they're there. We just need to connect them with the rest of Australia. We need to show them that this area has a wonderful narrative. It's not some kind of nothing area where nothing happens. It's dynamic, it's livable, it's beautiful, it's got great diversity in it, it's important economically. It might not have a marketplace, it might need government intervention in terms of investment, and I say yes, I don't think government should be out of this at all. And we have to connect this part of Australia to those who live and those who vote in great numbers. Now, I think it's a challenge, but I don't think we can see the future separate to 22 million Australians. They've got to be in on this too. So just a few thoughts from me.
Thank you very much, Claire. I was a bit of a relief to finish on a slightly more positive note. I was about to slash my wrists with some of the miserable pictures I was getting of what failures we were, and I think we were struggling with that today, even at our general meeting, when we were talking about how to speak with one voice, how to capture the political ears, which I think we all say we must do, but as the panel members have said, that's not all we must do.